This may have been a virtual meeting, but Ukraine's president was determined to be at its centre in person. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz trying a last-minute muster of European muscle ahead of the Trump-Putin summit on Friday. An hour of preliminaries before the US president and vice president joined the call and the real business of persuasion began. First to the cameras afterwards, the French president, saying Trump had agreed to a key precept.
The question of Ukrainian territory can and will only be negotiated by the Ukrainian president. This is the position that we support, and it has been very clearly expressed by President Trump.
In Berlin, Chancellor Merz listing that among a set of principles put to Trump, including security guarantees for Europe and Ukraine, a ceasefire before full negotiations, and no legal recognition of Ukrainian territory held by Russia. Trump, he said, largely shared European views.
I told the US president and all our European colleagues that Putin is bluffing. He is trying to put pressure before the meeting in Alaska along all parts of the Ukrainian front. Russia is trying to show that it can occupy all of Ukraine.
But if Russia's recent advances are a pre-talks maneuver, their impact all too real on the ground in eastern Ukraine. The town of Bilozerska in Donetsk, one of a dozen communities where families have been ordered to leave.
They were shooting everywhere, around the city, at houses, in the centre, at the bus stop, everywhere. Houses are destroyed.
You have to leave everything behind, your belongings. You take 2 bags and leave.
The fear for Ukraine is that the US president might still be persuaded Russia doesn't need to fight for this land. It should just be given the rest of Donetsk. Trump has already talked of territorial swaps and changes, in his words, to the betterment of both sides.
There can be no negotiations about Ukraine without Ukraine, and that's been a long-standing principle.
Here, the Prime Minister chaired the third call of the day for those ready to support a post-war reassurance force in Ukraine. He said the earlier meetings had gone well, that there was now a chance for a ceasefire. In Moscow, today's meetings met with scorn.
We consider the consultations requested by the Europeans as politically and practically insignificant. Russia's position remains unchanged, and it was voiced in this very hall just over a year ago.
Then Vladimir Putin said the conflict would only be settled when Ukraine withdrew entirely from every region claimed by Russia and committed to never joining NATO.
Please.
This evening, Trump himself questioned on today's call, which he rated a 10, and what lies in store in Alaska.
Will Russia face any consequences if Vladimir Putin does not agree to stop the war after your meeting on Friday?
Yes, they will. Yeah.
What will the consequences
there will be
be?
consequences.
Sanctions, tariffs?
There will be, I don't have to say, there will be very severe consequences, yes.
That's something he's promised and postponed before, and he went on to float the prospect of a second, more consequential meeting.
If the first one goes okay, we'll have a quick second one. I would like to do it almost immediately, and we'll have a quick second meeting between President Putin and President Zelensky and myself if they'd like to have me there. Now, there may be no second meeting, because if I feel that it's not appropriate to have it because I didn't get the answers that we have to have, then we're not going to have a second meeting.
Trump may have allayed some of the worst European fears about what will happen at this military base on Friday, but those fears strong enough to prompt this unusual last-minute press ganging of a US president. None of them surely would dare predict exactly what will happen when Trump and Putin talk one-to-one.
Well, John Foreman was the UK's defence attaché in Moscow from 2019 to 2022, previously served in the same role in Kyiv. Vadim Halychuk is a Ukrainian MP from President Zelensky's party. They both join me now. John Foreman, of course, what Trump says today might be completely different tomorrow or Friday. So what are your expectations now?
Well, I think, Matt, over the last week or so, I think Trump's position for last Friday, which was very shocking to Europeans, has been slightly become more emollient. I mean, he's had his meeting with the Europeans. His officials had a meeting with the coalition of willing. So I think as to today, it's a good thing. But as you say, I think for Friday, I think the press conference that Trump gave at the Kennedy Center played down expectations for Friday. He's now really talking about laying the foundations of further talks. And it strikes me that the ceasefire, which has been insisting as a precondition, has slipped further and become more remote. And we're back to where we were a week ago, threatening severe consequences.
So we shouldn't expect a ceasefire on Friday?
I don't think so, no. I don't think the Russians will give into it. I think a ceasefire requires a huge amount of work. I was saying, though, that the ceasefire for the data accords was 150 pages long. None of that detailed work has been done. And even if you had a cessation of hostilities, the problem would be of ceasefire violations by the Russians, who did the same in Donbass after 2014. So I would say let's be realistic about our ambitions. But if Trump feels there's a second round of meetings and he brings down consequences that he's talked about onto the Russians' heads, I think if Putin doesn't budge, I think that would be a positive outcome.
Vadim Halaichuk, what are you expecting?
Well, we here awaiting the meeting with some excitement. The position that the Russians have formed for a while back is obviously not something Putin can come and sit across the table with Trump. So we're very curious and, as I said, even excited to learn what has changed in that position. Because just come there and lay out the ultimatum that Putin laid out earlier would not be the way to approach this, we understand. So there's something else. And again, we're eager to find out what it is. Obviously, Russians are very, very anxious about lifting sanctions, or at least moving in that direction, at least getting something agreed on. And what is it that they are ready to offer in terms of change in their position, which is unacceptable for obvious reasons. I mean, the ultimatum that they set out that Ukraine should move out, take out its troops from all the 4 regions, that would be the key issue. Therefore, let's wait and see. We have formed our position. We are strongly supported by our European allies who have confirmed the red lines, or whatever you want to call them. And we know that President Trump has the instruments, has the tools to influence Putin's desire to be a little more lenient towards serious discussion on what ceasefire and then peace talks might look like.
When you talk about red lines, I mean, Trump keeps talking about land swaps. Now this was all Ukrainian land. I mean, is Ukraine prepared to swap territory that that Russia has so that it can keep it in return for getting back some of the land that Russia is currently occupying?
No, we're not. I mean, there are so many reasons. Ukrainian constitution prohibits it. Any change in the borders would require a referendum inside the country, and the public opinion is very clear on that. Any move on our part from those territories that we control that are quite well fortified would certainly pose threat to all the rest of our territory. So there's so many reasons for which we cannot accept any of that, and Russians know it perfectly, and our European allies know it. So this is, like I said, a very clear position that land cessation is not an option. We can certainly discuss those options that were on the table. We understand perfectly well that we are not capable of getting back the territories. So, given that, we certainly in a position to discuss what arrangements could be made so that we recognize that we're not in control of those territories, that Russia is in physical control, and what could be done about that. But simply rewarding the aggressor, simply making the gift of our lands, of our people, this is not an option that anyone in Ukraine is considering.
Just briefly, John Foreman, I mean, what is the trap for Zelensky here? If Trump and Putin say, okay, we've got a proposal, Zelensky come and talk about it, what is the danger for him?
Well, the danger is that Trump meets Putin. I mean, we had in the past when Trump met Putin in 2018, Putin bamboozled him with all sorts of facts and figures and Russian history and strange battles from the 13th century. And it sort of discombobulated Trump. He came out rather confused. And I think that's the worry for me, of this sort of personalized diplomacy, using people like Steve Witkoff, who's not an expert on diplomacy, let alone Russia, to negotiate with the Russians. And then Trump then meeting Putin underprepared and coming out with an inconsistent position and over-promising and not being able to deliver and trying to ram it down the throats of the Ukrainians. And I think that therefore the other risk would be that Trump then walks away and then Zelensky is left exposed and the Europeans left holding the baby. So I think the stakes are very high for Friday, and I hope that President Trump is fully prepared and fully briefed, and that they've walked through carefully the way that Putin will do it, and actually to be able to counter some of Putin's nonsense.
John Foreman, Vadim Halaychuk, thank you both very much. Well, Matt is in Alaska ahead of Friday's summit. Matt.
Thanks, Christian. Welcome to Anchorage, Alaska, about 4,500 miles both from Moscow and from Washington, D.C. It is here in the midpoint that Presidents Trump and Putin will meet on Friday to begin discussing the future of war and peace in Ukraine and, you might say, Europe. But neither Ukrainian nor European leaders will, of course, be at the table, as far as we know. They hope that their interests have been hammered out again in that digital meeting today with Donald Trump, and crucially that they will be remembered and represented on Friday by him. The president has rather different interests, you might say, as well as a short attention span, famously, infamously, and limited knowledge of the details of the issue, of the maps, of the history. Now, for the Europeans and the Ukrainians, it is like betting on an unreliable, perhaps somewhat fickle prize fighter. For the Russians, the stakes are also high. Could they provoke Trump into imposing more sanctions and isolating Russia further on the global stage? Usually, the only sport here in Anchorage in the summer is salmon fishing and game hunting. But the amused fishing and hunting crowd has been joined by Secret Service agents, lots of them, and of course US government officials. Will Anchorage be remembered for the blood sport of geopolitics when this week is over, and with whom as the bounty? Well, earlier I spoke to Jennifer Kavanagh, who's Director of Military Analysis at the Defence Priorities Institute, and I started by asking her about historical summits where weaker parties are often thrown under the bus, like Munich or Yalta.
Well, every time that Trump has a call with Putin, this idea of past summits in which the weaker party has been thrown under the bus comes up. It comes up over and over and over. And Trump has now talked with Putin, I think, 6 times since he came into office. And he has yet to give away anything, any part of Ukraine, or to compromise Ukraine. In fact, he's been willing to continue to support Ukraine. If he really wanted to throw Ukraine under the bus, he would have done it already. So I see his continuing to stick with Ukraine and continuing to try to work towards some other solution as an indication that, really compromising Ukraine's security or its future sovereignty is not something that Donald Trump wants.
Because when you talk to European officials, or indeed Ukrainian officials, what they're really worried about is, one, that Trump hasn't got enough experts around him in the actual negotiating room to know when Putin is telling him something that may be wrong, but also that he will actually remember what that unified position is, and that he will be able to represent especially Ukraine's wishes at the negotiating table. Is that a fair fear?
Well, I think that the focus of this first negotiation, I don't think is going to be making any sort of deal. Trump has made it clear that his intention here is to listen to what Putin has to say and to understand where Putin's red lines and areas of flexibility are. I think that Trump is capable of carrying out this type of discussion and of remembering. I don't think this is going to be a meeting where Trump and Putin get out a map and start dividing up territory or start making technical decisions about the capabilities of Ukraine's future military. I think this is really the intention here, is to open a channel of communication and to jumpstart a diplomatic process that has really been stalled for some time.
Jennifer, land swaps may be something that's decided, in another later meeting, but of course land swaps alone are not sufficient to end this war with any kind of settlement that would be acceptable to the Ukrainians or to the Russians.
I think that's a really important point. Territory is actually not the most important thing in this war. It's not the most important thing to Putin. It's not the most important thing to Ukraine. There's a whole range of other issues that need to be decided. Ukraine's future security alignment, whether it has NATO membership or not, is one question that will have to be addressed. The question of NATO expansion generally is another thing that Putin has brought up. Ukraine's future military capabilities, the treatment of Russian minorities within Ukraine. These are all issues that are at the heart of this war, and they will all require resolution before there's a final settlement that can last. So there's a lot of focus on territory because it's something that people can visualize and understand more easily than a lot of these more complex issues. But territory is really one of the least important things that will have to be resolved here.
There's also independence and there's sovereignty. And of course, the Ukrainian and European fear is that Donald Trump doesn't value those things as much as he values territory. And we know from what the Russians have been saying that their position about Ukraine effectively being a vassal state of Moscow hasn't really changed. So what do you think, what kind of progress do you think these talks might make on that front?
I mean, again, I think that Trump's goal going into this conflict is, number one, to try to gauge and feel out Putin, to understand where he is flexible if the goal is to achieve peace. But he also made clear that he's ready to walk away and to leave Ukraine and Russia to deal with us on their own, with Europe if it chooses to be involved. President Trump has his priority is U.S. interests. And the U.S. has an interest in this conflict ending for two reasons. First of all, because it continues to drain U.S. military resources that could be allocated to higher priorities. And number two, because any conflict in which the United States and Russia are even indirectly involved has the risk of escalating to a potentially catastrophic nuclear conflict. Those are the two things that Trump has to keep in mind. But U.S. interests at stake in Ukraine otherwise are quite small. And Trump is correct to say that he could walk away if it's clear that there's really no deal to be had here yet.
And what about a ceasefire, Jennifer?
Well, a ceasefire will definitely have to be part of this discussion, but even there's a disagreement. Russia would like the ceasefire to occur after negotiations start. They have terms for their ceasefire. Ukraine would like the ceasefire first and then negotiations after. So that difference of opinion will also have to be worked out.
Jennifer Kavanagh, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
I think it's fair to say that the White House and especially Donald Trump don't tend to lower expectations, in fact, quite the opposite. But on this occasion, that's exactly what they've been doing. I think they realize that there's so much at stake here, so much could go wrong. There are so many bear traps laid here in Alaska for Donald Trump that I think he's being quite careful, and lowering expectations may be exactly the right tone to set before the big meeting on Friday. And of course, we'll be here live as well tomorrow night. See you then. Let's go back to Krish in London. Krish.